feel sorry for the students that already heard me today at First Baptist Christian School, because we sang that song before I spoke this morning at chapel called 10,000 Reasons. Bless the Lord, O my soul. I told them, and not a coincidence that we sang that again tonight. A different group of people leading us in that song tonight did not know we sang it this morning. When my alarm goes off on my cell phone to wake me up in the morning, that's the song that goes off on my cell phone every morning. Bless the Lord, O my soul. The sun comes up. It's a new day dawning. It's amazing when you realize that God has given us each day that He gives us to live on this earth. And when you wake up and you're able to worship Him from the beginning of your day, and you know that He's put you here with a purpose. He's created you. He's created this world. He's placed us here for His honor and His glory. And then I told them that when I go into the bedroom to wake up Noah and Joshua, I like to listen to that song 2 or 3 times before I turn my alarm off every morning. So I'm up walking around the house, drinking coffee with it still playing. I walk into the boys' bedroom, and they sleep in bunk beds in the same room, but they actually sleep in the same bed because they're both scared to sleep by themselves, so they end up in the same bed every night. And when I walk in, that song's probably playing about the 3rd time now, and Noah knows it well because he knows it's time to get up. And you can hear that song being played, and you can think about how great God is, and then Noah rolls over and says, Daddy, I don't want to get up. Daddy, I don't want to go to school. You think about your attitude that we have sometimes as children, and even as spiritual children. The more we grow in our walk with the Lord, the more we realize what a privilege it is to wake up each morning and live each day that God's given us, because He created us. He created this world. Of course, the enemy lies to us and tells us that we've evolved from amoeba and bacteria all the way through birds and apes, monkeys, and then into human beings. We talked last week a little bit about what evolution teaches out of science textbooks. If you weren't here last week, we'll catch you up a little bit as we walk through tonight a little bit more about it. If you see this first slide tonight from where we left off last week, it shows you a timeline. And on this timeline, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, Genesis 1:1, a creationist timeline. If you believe that God created the world, like He said, in 6 days, and on the 7th day He rested, then about 6,000 years ago, God created the heavens and the earth. I will show you where we get the about 6,000 years from the Old Testament, and how old Adam and Eve were when they had Seth, and you can kind of trace it down through the Old Testament until the flood, which we know the flood was about 4,400 years ago. About 2400 BC. That's if you believe in creation and the 6 days of creation. Evolutionist timeline you see on the bottom is about 20 billion years ago the Big Bang happened. And so you basically boil it down to these two: in the beginning God, or in the beginning dirt. Okay? And if you believe in the beginning dirt, you got to ask yourself where the dirt came from to begin with. If you've ever heard that joke, I'll save it for later. On the next slide, this is a little bit more detailed. On the creationist timeline on the top, you see that Jesus' birth there in the middle of that timeline 4,400 years ago. There was a flood. We're in 2013 now on the right. Interesting now in science textbooks, for the most part, they've taken BC out of textbooks and put BCE in, which means before the Common Era, because they don't want to admit that Jesus Christ's life on this earth, 33 or so years on this earth, divides time as we know it from BC and AD. But now they've changed that because they don't want to believe in God. Evolutionist timeline, which is attack supported. I'm going to show you tonight a very interesting study on why the United States pushed evolution into science textbooks about 1963 and where that came from. But it was lobbied by the government to put it in textbooks, in science textbooks, when there's no science there. You'll have to forgive me tonight if I have to put on my glasses for the first time in my life, because I had to go to the eye doctor today. And my eyes have been dilated and they're still a little blurry, so I'm hoping I can put it off because I'm embarrassed to put my glasses on for the first time. So if I can see my notes tonight. 4.6 billion years ago on the bottom, I don't know if you can see that from where you're sitting. On the bottom, 4.6 billion years ago, the earth evolved, if you believe in evolution. 3 billion years ago, life evolved. These are important numbers to remember as we get into our study. And about 3 million years ago, man evolved. So if people that believe in evolution believe that mankind, human beings, have been here for 3 million years. Okay? We'll show why that can't be true scientifically and also from the Bible. Here's one of my problems having a PhD in chemistry. Many of you know I taught in the university for 9 years. is a lot of people think if you're a believer in God or you're religious, then you don't know a whole lot about science. And so look at the heading on this newspaper clip from a while back from the El Paso Times. Religious and scientific leaders debate evolution. See what it implies? You're either a scientific leader and you know science, or you're a religious person, but you can't be a religious person that knows science. See what's implied there? And so, that's okay for a preacher to get up and say, well, God created the world in 6 days, but they don't know science. And so let's start looking at what science teaches about evolution. Evolution is not a science. It's a theory. There's no facts to support it. And we talked about that a little bit last week. I told you that Ken Hovind, a good friend of mine years ago, got to spend a lot of time with him, science teacher that went around, high school, 7th grade science teacher that went around debating PhDs from Harvard and Yale and Princeton, and really embarrassing them a lot in science. And every time he would ask them questions about science, the lack of science and evolution, he would get a lot of responses. He was on a plane trip one day, and as God would have it, set him next to a PhD, if I remember correctly, biologist from Yale. Okay, and he's sitting on the plane next to this guy, and this guy, so Ken Hovind finds out he's a PhD biologist, and he asks him if he believes in evolution. And he says, yes, I believe in evolution. And he said, well, and he started walking through what I taught you last week, that science textbook teach about evolution, that all the matter in the universe were concentrated into a dot the size of the period on this page. That dot got energy and began to spin, and it exploded, hence the term Big Bang. And Ken Hovind asked this PhD from Yale that question. He said, is that right about evolution? He said, yes, it is. So then he went on this next slide to ask him some questions, since he said, yes, that's what evolution basically boils down to. The first question Ken Hovind asked this PhD biologist was, where did the matter come from? If all the matter in the universe was concentrated into a dot the size of the period on this page that textbooks teach and it was spinning, where did the matter come to begin with to be condensed? And this PhD biologist said, well, I don't know. I can't answer that question. Second question Ken Hovind asked him was, where did the laws come from? I mean, if we have laws like centripetal force and gravity and inertia, if there's laws, shouldn't there be a lawgiver? I mean, where those laws come from to begin with? And the PhD biologist from Yale said, I don't know the answer to that question either. He got to the third question. He said, where did the energy come from? Because you said all the matter was concentrated into a dot the size of a period on a page. It got enough energy to start spinning, and it spun fast enough that it finally exploded, hence the Big Bang. Where did the energy come to start the dot spinning? To which the PhD biologist said, what do you think? I don't know. And then Ken Hovind said, well, can I ask you one more question? And this is what's really funny to me, because Ken Hovind has shared this story with me, and he shared it with many people nationwide. The PhD guy from Yale said, yes, what else can I answer for you? Okay? When he hadn't answered anything yet. And so he said, you can learn a lot from a merry-go-round. He said, you can learn a lot of science from a merry-go-round. And so this is the story he told him sitting on this plane as it was flying through the air while we're orbiting the sun at 10,000 miles per hour in our orbit around the sun and rotating on our axis at about 1,000 miles per hour at the equator. And he's flying through space, and this guy doesn't believe God put the earth exactly like he did where we live. He said, let's say a football team in high school, we're going to spin some kids on a merry-go-round. And you'll see this first little cartoon picture. And if they're like my kids, Noah and Joshua, you put them on a merry-go-round, the first thing they say is, push me faster. Spin this thing faster. And so if the football team could spin a merry-go-round faster, and let's say in the next slide they got it up to 30 miles per hour, okay? And so the kids that were screaming, push this merry-go-round faster, are now holding on for dear life because now they're afraid they're going to die, and they're not screaming anymore, push it faster. Well, let's say you could keep pushing that merry-go-round up to 40 miles per hour. Now those children that are screaming, please push the merry-go-round faster, on this next slide are going to start hollering, stop. Okay? We want off the merry-go-round. Kent Hovind's teaching them some science here. It's a law that we'll look at in just a second. If you could spin the merry-go-round fast enough where the kids could no longer hold on to the merry-go-round, then you would see this next picture where they're flying off the merry-go-round. Now, what Ken Hovind was trying to get this guy to see is you can go into a lab in a frictionless environment, and you can take a top and you can spin that top fast enough until that top literally explodes. That's science. You can do it over and over and over again. So he's showing him if you can spin a merry-go-round fast enough that a centripetal force throws those children off of that merry-go-round. If the merry-go-round is spinning clockwise, then the kids fly off the merry-go-round and they are spinning clockwise. Unless, this next slide, they hit an immovable object like a tree or something. They will be spinning clockwise. And so this is what's called the law of angular momentum, or the conservation of angular momentum. This is science. It can be proven over and over again that if you spin something fast enough till it explodes, if it's spinning clockwise, everything that flies off of it when it explodes will be spinning clockwise as well. Ken Hovine's on the plane. He's already asked this guy 3 questions about where the matter comes from, where the lawgiver comes from, where the energy comes from, which he couldn't answer. He said that's a scientific law, but that refutes evolution, because evolution teaches the Big Bang, that everything got into a dot, was spinning in a frictionless environment. It had to be frictionless because all the matter in the universe was in the dot. There left nothing else to cause friction, okay? And so when it spins and explodes, he said that meant when the Big Bang happened that we should have everything spinning the same way in our universe. And so this next slide, you'll see that we know Venus, Uranus, and possibly Pluto, which is a debate about whether it's a planet or not anymore, rotate backwards. In fact, Uranus rotates on its side and spins like this, which is pretty interesting. And then the next slide shows you that of all the moons that we have surrounding our planets in our solar system, 6 of those 63 rotate backwards compared to the other ones. In fact, a couple of our planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, have moons that go in both directions. So they literally pass each other as they're going around their planets. Now, in a previous debate I was in several years ago, I brought this point up about if the Big Bang happened, everything should be spinning the same direction as it explodes out into space. To which a PhD chemist was in the debate against me, said, yeah, but you don't understand that the moon started inside the planets and were birthed outside the planets. Then another person in that debate said, I don't believe they were birthed outside of the planets. I don't think the moon started inside the planet and was birthed out of it. I believe that they collided in space, and when they collided in space, they bounced off of each other like a pool ball on a pool ball table would and went in the opposite direction. Now, the only problem with that suggestion is we are traveling once again right now on this earth through the solar system as we sit, what you think, still in a sanctuary. We're traveling through space right now at 10,000 miles per hour. Wrap your mind around that for a little bit tonight. Around our orbit of the sun, we're on an Earth that's spinning at 1,000 miles per hour at the equator, tilted perfectly on its axis to cause the 4 seasons which we need to survive on this Earth. We're sitting exactly where we need to sit from the sun for life to exist on this planet. Any closer to the sun, we would burn up. Any further away, we would freeze to death. All planned by our great creator, the great designer, Yahweh God. And as we're traveling through space at 10,000 miles per hour, what would happen if another thing traveling at 10,000 miles per hour were to hit us? It wouldn't be like a pool ball on a pool table that just bounced off of each other. If I could shoot a pool ball 10,000 miles per hour into another pool ball traveling 10,000 miles per hour, there wouldn't be any pool balls left, okay? They would be obliterated, okay? And so there's a lot of holes in people's theory, but there's science that shows that the Big Bang is impossible for it to happen. The fact that there's so much void space out in outer space. You think about the Earth, and let's put the Earth down on a scale and say the Earth is 1 inch in its diameter across. A little bitty ball, like a little rubber ball my son Noah bounces all the time at the house. If that was the size of the Earth, then the nearest star besides our sun is Alpha Centauri would be 51,000 miles away if the Earth was 1 inch in its diameter. That's a lot of void space. Magnify that millions of times to show you what it would be like for real. I tell people this joke all the time. I believe in the Big Bang. My Big Bang is just differently than everybody else's Big Bang. My Big Bang hadn't happened yet, okay? 2 Peter 3:10 on the screen. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief. The heavens will disappear with a roar, Big Bang. The elements will be destroyed by fire, and the earth and everything in it will be laid bare. I believe there's going to be a loud bang one day when Jesus Christ parts the sky to call his children home. And it hasn't happened yet, but we're looking forward to that day. If you recall from last Wednesday night, first law of thermodynamics refutes evolution, that matter cannot be created nor destroyed, just move from one point to another. Can't create something from nothing, is the first law of thermodynamics. Second law that you'll see on the screen of thermodynamics also refutes evolution. You'll notice as they click to the next couple slides, the building in the background as it disappears. Second law of thermodynamics is the law of entropy, which means disorder. And that law teaches that if you don't add energy into something, then it goes to a state of disorder. See, evolution teaches everything's becoming more ordered. The world's actually becoming more disordered. Law of entropy, the women probably here understand the law of entropy much more than the men. When women go to sleep at night, their hair goes to a state of disorder during the night, okay? They don't put any energy into brushing their hair, spraying their hair, or anything like that. And when they wake up in the morning, their hair's going everywhere. Okay, that's the law of entropy, to help you understand that a little bit better, which goes against evolution that teaches that we are becoming more and more ordered. For example, here's some more science textbooks that teach a little bit about their view of evolution. On this science textbook, this Earth science textbook, it says humans probably evolved from bacteria that lived more than 4 billion years ago. We've evolved from bacteria. Then you look at this next textbook, science textbook. It's got a picture of this starfish. If you'll see the next slide, it's blown up a little bit where you can see what's in yellow a little bit better. It says that single-cell marine organisms nearly 3.4 billion years old to the remains of the early ancestors of modern human beings. They're teaching that we evolved from bacteria. They're teaching that we evolved from starfish, that we're becoming more and more disordered instead of understanding what the law of entropy implies. Here's a teacher's textbook from 1989. Sorry for the old resources. That's the year after I graduated high school, which shows my age. I'm sorry. Teacher's textbook. Here's a picture of my twin brother who's coming for revival on the next slide. It's had a little bit too much coffee, a little bit too caffeine. Got some big old eyes. If you look at this textbook, enlarged, what you see on the next slide on the top there that's circled, it says about 30 million years ago, large primates such as monkeys and apes evolved. The earliest fossil apes that may be ancestral to both humans and modern apes date from about 15 to 20 million years ago. One book says we evolved from bacteria, another one from starfish, and this one says that we've evolved from monkeys 15 to 20 million years ago. It's what textbooks teach. All this becoming more and more ordered. So my joke on this next slide is, that's our grandpa. That's great, 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 and on some more greats. Grandpa, but that's what they teach, that's what's happened. Easiest way to refute evolution is, if we've evolved from monkeys, how come we can't see anyone evolving from monkeys today? If survival of the species is true, and it is, and we've survived from monkeys, then they should be extinct now, or we should be seeing them evolve right now into more human beings, and we don't see that take place. Now here's it's a lie from the enemy, okay? And Satan's a great deceiver, and more people today believe in evolution than believe in God created them, like he says in the book of Genesis. What you believe dictates the way you behave. You say you believe something, but my actions show what I really believe. Here's an article that's really startling to me. It's entitled, "Your Kids Go Ape in School. Here's Why." If you teach somebody they evolved from a monkey, then what are they going to act like? Okay? And this article enlarged a little bit. I love the names they chose. In most schools, Johnetta and Johnny, okay, I guess Johnetta is the female Johnny, but Johnetta and Johnny are being taught evolution, that humankind evolved from apes. And so, talks about teaching creationism down there, but the whole point is, if you teach somebody they evolved from monkeys, then don't expect them not to act like that. And that's giving people an excuse to live like hell, excuse my language tonight, and say it's okay because they have no one to answer to because they don't believe in God as a creator. I had this textbook my second year in grad school, this biology textbook and some upper level biology and chemistry classes in grad school, and when I read this statement, I was a little enraged, okay? It says, "You are an animal and you share a common heritage with earthworms." Straight out of the textbook. Evolved from bacteria in one textbook, starfish in another textbook, apes with big eyes, too much caffeine, and then now we are evolving from earthworms, and we are an animal. It's not what the Bible says. The Bible says in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So the question is, when is the beginning? It'll take us a while to get there, but we're going to walk through what the Old Testament says on the beginning and how we can go back and see the beginning. If you weren't here last time, I want to share with you real quick before we go on so you see where we're going. Here's what evolution teaches again in 2 quick slides. First of all, 80 to 20, straight out of a first grade textbook, 80 to 20 billion years ago, all the matter in the universe was concentrated into a very dense, very hot region that may have been much smaller than appeared on this page. Then it exploded. That explosion is called the Big Bang. When I showed this slide last week, I could tell many of you had never heard that that's what evolutionists teach. This next slide says that all the matter and the energy will once again be packed into a small area, no bigger than a period at the end of the sentence. Then another Big Bang will occur, and this happens every 80 to 100 billion years. Not one Big Bang, billions of years ago, but in another 80 to 100 billion years, we'll have another one, and in another 80 to 100 billion years, we'll have another one, and that's what evolutionists really believe. What can be taught in schools today? Can you teach creation science? The earth is a young earth and that God created it less than 10,000 years ago. Can you teach that in classrooms in public schools? Yes. There's so many documents out there about people have the right to teach any plausible way that we were put on this earth. So if you can teach evolution as a plausible way, you can teach creation as a plausible way. Here's another resource. Teaching creation, this is from Christian Science Evangelism, teaching creation in public schools. The problem is most people that are teachers teach what the science textbook tells them to teach. And this next slide, the major reason most people will not teach creation science in public schools is because of the ACLU. The ACLU, if you do your research, has won very, very few cases that's gone to court. They base everything off of the threat of a lawsuit. What do I mean by that? If a student goes home from a school that's being taught that God created the world in 6 days and the earth is 10,000 years or younger, and they go home and their parent finds out about it and they call the ACLU, then the ACLU will go to that school, they'll send a representative, they will go into the principal's office and say, if you do not tell your science teacher to quit teaching that in their science class, then we're going to bring a suit up against the school and you and that teacher. So you know what the principal does? The principal calls the teacher into their office and sets the teacher down and say, look, the ACLU's threatened to sue us. I need you to stop teaching what you're teaching in the class. Because the principal doesn't want to be sued, and she or he doesn't want the school sued. And most people don't want to go spend the money to get a lawyer to defend them. They win very few cases, but they threaten a lot, and so they have people who will not stand up for God back down very easily. But here's what the Bible says. Look at this little cartoon. You have somebody that stands up and teaches evolution, which is not a science. There's no proof to it whatsoever scientifically. If they get up and teach that, here's the evolutionary chain. What does God's Word say about it? How serious is God about leading someone astray to not believe in God as the King, Creator, Master of the universe? Listen to Matthew 18:6. But if anyone calls one of the least one of these who believe in me to sin or to stumble, it would be better for him to have a large millstone hung around his neck and to be drowned into the depths of the sea. In other words, God would rather somebody be dead than to lead somebody to hell instead of to God. So that's why I'm real nervous before I speak on Wednesday nights and before I preach, because I want to make sure that I don't cause anyone to stumble, that what I speak is the words of God, and that I don't lead anybody to not believe in the one true God. Now, where did evolution come from to begin with in science textbooks? Look at this next slide. A little indoctrination of evolution. Notice before 1961, there was about 2,000 to 3,000 words about evolution in science textbooks. And you might think that's a lot. That's very, very little compared to the whole volume of words in one science textbook. 1961 to 1962, you saw a huge jump that the government lobbied to have evolution increased in its teaching in science textbooks, so it jumped from 2,000 to 3,000 words to over 28,000 words. Now it's 33,000 to 63, and you see a decline. The decline is not really a decline because people got tired of reading so much, so to catch people's attention, they added a lot more pictures to textbooks for people to look at. The basic percentage of words now is still the same as it's been in 63. If anything, it's higher than it was in 63. Why 63? Why from 1960 to 63 was there a huge push by the government to put evolution in science textbooks? It goes back to 1957. I said this wrong in a sermon, and 25 scientists came up and told me how wrong it was, and I'm sorry, I'm a human being, I make mistakes. I said that the Russians beat us in the space race and they landed on the moon. They didn't land on the moon before us, but they got the first satellite into space before us. I made that error in the way I said it. They sent Sputnik up into space and beat us in putting a satellite into space. When they started looking at, because they thought they were superior to the United States scientists because they beat us in the space race, so somehow they must be more intelligent, they started looking at what they were teaching in Russia, and they were teaching evolution a lot in their science classes. So the U.S. government said, well, if they're teaching evolution and we're not, we need to start teaching more evolution so our scientists can become smart enough to get ahead of the Russians. In 1959 is the 100-year anniversary of Darwin's book. So you put some of this together, it was lobbied in, not to mention Madeline Murray O'Hare taking prayer out of school in 1963. A lot of factors involved in that because they thought that would make us better scientists, that would help us become smarter, and that would help us to know more. Now, interesting, when you do a study from what happened since 1963, when the huge push of evolution was put in textbook, you find some startling results. This next slide. Sexually transmitted diseases. You teach somebody they evolved, they have no God to answer to, they can do whatever they want to do. This will blow you away. This is from 10 to 14-year-olds. Sexually transmitted disease jumped 385% from 63. Now this takes into account the population growth. This is the percentage of cases in the population. So don't say, well, we've grown a lot in our population. That's been taken into account. Next slide. Percentage of teenage girls having premarital sex. Huge increase since 1963. Once again, you keep teaching people something, it affects what they believe. What we believe affects the way we behave. Next slide. Birth rates for unwed girls. I know this will blow you away and astonishing, but it's 10 to 14-year-olds. Okay? The birth rates jumped up 100% since 63. Pregnancies jumped up 553%. You do the math of the hundreds of percents that were aborted. Okay? So really it jumped 553%, but most of those were aborted. Divorce rates. You go back to 1963. I know I preached a sermon on divorce, a very sensitive subject, but in 1960, 63, I mean, if somebody was getting a divorce, it was all over the church because that was pretty much unheard of in the 60s. Now, since 1963, you've seen a huge increase where it's right around 50% of people that get married get a divorce. Violent crime offenses since 1963, staggering increase, almost 1,000% increase in violent crimes. If you believe in evolution, then, if you want to murder somebody, rape somebody, steal from somebody, then violent crimes has gone up because they don't believe there's a God that will judge them one day. Now remember, it was pushed in 61 and 62 into public textbooks by the government to try to make us smarter as scientists. Did it make us smarter? Look at the next slide. SAT scores since 1963. Decrease in SAT scores. In fact, not to hurt your ego if you've taken the SAT in the last 20 or 30 years, but in 1995, they had to dumb down the SAT. Look at this next slide. People kept doing worse and worse and worse on it, that they had to change the test and make it easier so people's scores could get back up. But we put it in textbooks because the Russians beat us in the space race and they were teaching it in their science textbooks. I told the students this at school this morning, speaking at chapel, that suicide right now is at an all-time high. Look at the trend since 63, Okay? If you teach somebody that God did not create them, they have no purpose to live for, they're here by accident, by chance is what evolution teaches, then they don't think they have any value, they don't think they're worth anything, and so if they kill themselves, they don't think it's going to affect anything else. We all know, if we believe in God tonight, that God created each one of us, and He doesn't make any junk. He created us perfect the way He wanted us created, and He created every one of us differently, and He created every one of us with a purpose, and it's a different purpose for each one of us, but the ultimate purpose is to glorify God. But the enemy doesn't want people to believe that, so the enemy teaches that they evolved and teaches them that God didn't create the world in 6 days like the Bible tells us. Notice this next slide. You've always seen the fairy tale about if you kiss a frog, it'll turn into a prince. And if I told you that fairy tale, many of you say, yes, it's a fairy tale. That can never be true. But that's what evolution teaches. It just hides it in a couple billion years. Look at this next slide. Because they teach, there's the frog down there in the evolutionary chain, and that frog's going to evolve and go up into a monkey and then into a prince one day. And the fairy tale that no one would believe on kissing a frog, if you hide it in some billions of years, somehow people believe that. Here's another textbook, science textbook, that talks about the oceans, and 3 billion to 3.5 billion years ago, this water vapor condensed and it began to rain, these torrential rains, and this organic soup formed, and somehow in this organic soup life formed, and somehow that life that formed happened to have a male reproductive system and a female reproductive system that could find themselves and continue the human race, which takes more faith to believe in than God created the first man and woman, Adam and Eve. So this next slide talks about volcanoes and talks about the fact that volcanoes erupted, and since volcanoes erupted, that means that millions of years ago that the earth formed from hot liquid magma inside the earth, and that formed the earth. Now, do volcanoes erupt? Yes. But does that mean that the earth formed from hot molten lava inside the earth? No. And when you see something that says millions of years, the first question you need to ask yourself is, were you there? Who proves that? Who observed that? Because science has to be observed. It can't be what you think happened. That's why this next slide shows you the definition of science. Systematized knowledge derived from observation, study, etc. You have to observe it to be science. Remember, 99.9% of stuff that's in science textbook is science. Evolution is not science. And there's museums like the Smithsonian that have evolutionary exhibits with a half monkey, half man. And when they are sent scientific proof on archaeological digs that refute evolution, they refuse to put it in their museum because it goes against what's already there in its teachings. In other words, they don't believe that, so they're not going to put anything in to support what that. Many people say, well, shouldn't we look at what the majority of Americans believe? Well, when has the majority ever been right? In Scripture, the majority was never right. Had 12 spies, 10 of them said, we're like grasshoppers in their eyes, and 2 of them, Joshua and Caleb, said, we can take this land with the strength of God, and they came back and got outvoted 10-2, and so they went with the majority and cost them a little time in the promised land. But here's what Americans believe. God created the earth in the last 10,000 years. 47% in 91, 95 it went to 61%. Now it's over 70% of people today believe that we live in a young earth because of science that's now being shown that supports a young earth, and the holes in the science are theories, that teach evolution. God guided evolution of man over millions of years. In other words, God used evolution to create the world. Went from 40% in 91 to 30% in 95, and now it's around 20%. Pure evolution, no God involved. It was 9% in 91. It dropped to 4 in 95, and now it's less than 2. Less than 2% of the world believes that there's no God and that evolution happened, but that's what's put in most public science textbooks. Don't know or didn't answer. They didn't want to wage an answer, so they put that there. Some people say, well, it doesn't matter what Americans believe. What do scientists believe? Because they supposedly know more. So they took all the PhDs in chemistry, biology, physics, all the PhD scientists, and polled them, and 55% of U.S. natural scientists believed in Darwinian evolution. But just because 55%, now it's 45%. The more that's being shown, the more they're realizing evolution can't be true. But even if the majority of the scientists in this world teach evolution, does not make it true. Notice this next slide. For years, most of the scientists on this planet taught the geocentric theory, which means they believed the Earth was the center of the solar system and everything else revolved around the Earth. Okay, when Galileo came on the scene, they thought Galileo was crazy because Galileo said the sun was the center of the solar system, and what he saw by patterning the stars, that we were orbiting around the sun, not the Earth standing still and everything orbiting around it. You know what they did to Galileo because of what he said? They put him in prison. He died in prison. In fact, some people wanted to burn him at the stake because they thought he was a witch and all these other things because he was teaching against what all the other scientists were teaching at that time. I wonder how they felt after that Galileo died in prison and years later they found out they were wrong and that the sun is now, yes, the center of the solar system, now that we have the technology, Hubble Space Telescope, and all the things that we can see. So just because the majority of scientists believe it does not make it right either. George Washington, I don't know if you know how he died. Years ago, they practiced what's called the doctrine of humors. Why did they call it the doctrine of humors? I still can't understand where they got that terminology. But that's the practice of bloodletting, draining the blood out of the body. And scientists, majority of them, almost everyone at that time, thought that if you had a disease, if you drained the blood out and purified it, then it would keep you alive. That's how George Washington ultimately ended up dying. If you ever see a barber pole that's got the stripes that are going around the barber's pole, that is the symbol from the doctrine of humors, okay? And so I'm not telling you not to go to a barber shop that's got the pole, but that's where that symbol came from to begin with. And if they knew anything about the scriptures, Leviticus 17 verse 11 says the life of the flesh is in the blood. Just showing you some examples. Just because scientists teach that does not mean it's right, okay? Real quick, and we're almost done. Look at this next picture. Let's say we were going on looking for treasure, looking for a sunken ship, and we were scuba diving and we found some coins, okay? And on this next slide, we find these coins and they have the dates on them, 1750, 1710, 1695. And you're going to try to deduce when did the boat sink. Let's see if you're thinking tonight. If these are the coins you found, these are the dates you found on the coins, then when did the boat sink? Had to be after, good, thank you, Pam. After, knew a college professor would get that. After 1750, it'd have to be after the most, the oldest coin that's there, right? And so 1750, yeah, we can kind of know it's past then. Here's the problem. When you find a dinosaur toe bone, dinosaurs walked on this earth. We're going to get to where they fit in in the scriptures, where they fit in, they're not billions of years old, okay? But when you find a dinosaur toe bone in an archaeological dig, it doesn't have a date stamped on it. 70 million BC, made in Taiwan, okay? It's not on there, okay? And so, how do you know how old it is? I told the students this morning in chapel, it's very humorous to me because I have a background in graduate geology. That's what my minor is in. I had to pick a minor when I was at USM, so chemistry was my major and geology was my minor. So I did a lot with rocks, and you know how they date rocks that they find? They date them by the fossils that are around them. So if they find a rock and they find fossils around it, fossil all is a decayed animal, something that's died and fossilized, and people teach that's proof that's evolution because it takes millions of years to fossilize. Don't know if you know this story. They found a boot with a man's leg cut off below the knee, fossilized in the boot, and they found that when they were digging in an excavation dig, and they were thinking this thing has to be billions of years old because it's fossilized in the boot. Problem is when they took the leg out of the boot, it had the date of 1952 inside the boot when it was made. So just because something fossilized does not mean it's millions of years old. But when they find a rock and they find the fossil around it, that's how they determine the approximate date. Take a guess on how they date the fossils. By the rocks they find around it. I'm being serious. It's circular reasoning. So somebody arbitrarily said this rock is a couple million years old, so this fossil's got to be somewhere around it. Same thing from the fossil back to the rock. Then in today's technology, they started doing carbon dating, and people think that carbon dating is accurate. Carbon dating is only accurate up to 3 to 4 half-lives. What happens on a half-life is that's how long it takes that carbon atom to split in half, to decay. Then so many more years on that half-life, it splits in half again. Now it's into fourths, and it keeps splitting. The problem with that is it never gets to zero. You keep splitting and it goes on to infinity. And even carbon dating specialists will tell you that once that carbon atom is split 3 or 4 times, that it becomes very inaccurate on the date. So carbon dating specialists will tell you that if anything's dated over 10,000 years old, it cannot be accurate. They took a woolly mammoth that they found in a dig in Iceland, and they took that woolly mammoth and they sent it to 4 different carbon dating labs. Took different parts of it, and it came back with 4 different dates. One of those dates was 13,600 years old. Another date was over 1 million years old. So I guess the tail was a little bit older than the other part, but it's very inaccurate science. But people will say that's proof that things are millions of years old. What we're going to do next week is we're going to walk through Genesis to see where people get the age of the earth being around 6,000 years old. And then we're going to look at some science that shows that we live in a young earth. Science has been done for 30, 40, 50, some up to 100 years of these experiments repeated over and over again that show that it would be impossible for the earth to be billions of years old, that it has to be less than 10,000 years old. And that's where we'll go from this point. Let's pray.